talked, starting with row 144, we talked about the FY23 budget and Mr. Purple's request to add 7,000 back to the personnel board budget. I think we should be clearer there. I believe the request was to add 7,000 on top of our 3,000, but we decided to just make it 7,000 total. There was a decent amount of discussion of whether we were going to amend our budget to 7,000 or 10,000 before we actually took a motion. And I didn't think the minutes properly captured that. So I think that could probably easily be resolved with a change to the first sentence where it said, Mr. Purple asked the board to add $7,000 back to the personnel budget as a transfer from the select board budget to increase the total to 10,000. And then we took the discussion from there.
Okay. Any other changes or corrections? Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the 2 corrections that Mr. Malinowski just made.
So moved. I'd second.
Okay,
Dorian, you move and I'll second.
Okay.
we have to do roll call vote. Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jasinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Minutes are approved. Just quickly note for the record the resignation of Dave Nixon. And I'm sure I speak for the entire committee in thanking Dave for his service to this committee and wishing him well in the future. Expenditure ledger, we haven't spent anything, so there's nothing to really discuss there. So let's skip over reports and go right to Attorney Fedorov. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We appreciate it. We have a number of questions. First one, I think Mr. Purple has brought to your attention the continuing quorum issue that we have and our inability to address a matter that needs to get done in time to be included in the warrant for the annual meeting, and wondered if you had any thoughts about how we might tackle that problem.
Yeah, so Mr. Purple and I have spoken and I had given him some thoughts. I don't necessarily want to say that the thoughts in a public forum because there's a piece relative to conflicts that's personal to two individuals. So I don't want to opine on that in the public setting, but the long and the short of it is the rule of necessity is applicable to elected bodies. And so we have a little bit of a quandary there, but I believe we may have a solution to ensure that you're able to get a quorum regardless, but I don't want to disclose that yet because I have to speak with the pertinent parties.
Okay, fair enough. Appreciate it. As long as there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
I think so.
I'm happy. Okay, moving on. I know Mr. Malinowski has a couple of questions about the SAP. So Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, so Kate, I know we had met one-on-one a few weeks ago, and while this may be a repetitive question for me personally, I think it's important for the full board to just hear some of your thoughts, and also noting that there's a significant number of employees that are on the SAP in this public meeting and that may watch the meeting after the fact. So my first question was really around, we're very focused on section 11 in whether we should do anything with it or not. That's really the vacation and sick leave. Not from a legal perspective, but just more from a practical perspective with other towns that you work with. Can you just give us some broad guidelines of how often you see items like that getting reviewed?
Yeah, so I will say in benefits in municipalities have shrunk considerably since, say, harken back to before I was a lawyer, before I was an adult, 1980s, right? The benefits used to be much more generous, right? And I'll give you for example. I have one town where they had unlimited sick time, for example, but it wasn't even an accrual basis. So it's not like they accrued 1.25 days a month or something, which is quite typical. They just, if they started a week ago, they had unlimited sick time, provided they were legitimately sick. But it became unsustainable. So those kinds of things were slowly addressed. Vacation is the same exact thing. There used to be an unlimited accrual on vacation, right? And then vacation, unlike sick, is something that you have to pay out upon separation, and it can be separation for any reason, including termination, et cetera, et cetera. So, or just voluntary retirement. And vacation becomes a real financial liability for towns because naturally the value of that vacation increases over the years as the person's salary increases over the years, right? So a vacation day to me today as, I don't know, let's pick a random department in a clerical staff in one of your departments, is much less valuable than it is 10 years from now when I retire. So what towns have often done in recent years is implement the use it or lose it policy, cap on time, or various other limitations. I don't see a ratcheting back of time that you accrue over the course of the year, but I do see those elements being implemented recent years.
And somewhat of a follow-on, actually, the sick leave payout that we have is actually a much larger financial burden to the town currently, at least based on our balance sheet, than the vacation, because we only allow they're allowed to carry over their current accrual rate. So some people it's 2 weeks, some people it's up to 6 weeks. Have you seen any towns shift to unlimited sick time and then put sick leave policies in place to obviously police abuse?
Yeah, so unlimited sick time, right? It's for policy reasons can be really helpful. If you have a terrible illness, you're covered, right? And you have that benefit. The sick time buyout is something that my towns struggle with all the time. And most towns are eliminating the buyout at the end of upon retirement, right? It's more difficult to bargain that out of collective bargaining agreements, but they're huge price tags. I have, for example, a town meeting this past year with a $30,000 buyout for a firefighter. And it's a big piece of the financial picture when you're dealing with that. And it's to some degree unanticipated. So I see the buyouts being ratcheted back. Typically, it's a grandfathered situation because especially if you have employees who are nearing retirement and who have been counting on that financial cushion at the end of their retirement, so they ease into retirement, it doesn't give them fair opportunity to plan in the same way as a 20-year-old would be planning. The unlimited sick time, I will say, although there is obviously a societal reason to do it, a human reason to do it, it is very expensive. You could have someone who's out for quite a long period of time, and that doesn't exist in the private sector. Not that municipalities are comparable to private sector, but it doesn't exist, and it could be a large chunk of time. So, I don't know if you have the financial capacity to make that sustainable. And sick time abuse is something that you can craft language around it. It is a violation of the policy. You can then discipline as a consequence, but they're really difficult cases.
Understood. So then my final question is more broad. I'm the newest member of the personnel board, and we're obviously going to have two newer members hopefully here soon that have even less tenure than myself. As you look across the other municipalities that you're working with, and as you become familiar with Southborough's in your time as our labor council, is there any areas that you would recommend we focus our efforts on, not for this town meeting, but like where we go as a board in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so the most modern way of handling personnel bylaws now is to essentially reduce them to a really small paragraph and have all of your personnel issues or built into policies, right? And what's the reason for that? They're just more flexible. As laws change, as you have certain experiences that open your eyes to a loophole in the benefit or a gap in the benefit, you can address them on a timely basis. Bylaws, because of the town meeting form of government, are just difficult to manage. You have to, number one, wait at least 6 months if you have 2 town meetings a year. Some towns only have 1 town meeting a year, so you can imagine. It's just difficult. Then you have to educate the public sometimes on what your legal obligation is. So if you have a legal obligation to do something and you have a bylaw that's on the books that's in conflict, what happens if that town meeting votes it down because maybe the presentation wasn't as articulate as you could have made it? Some piece of information wasn't coming across. It is very cumbersome, and I personally don't like having to manage through those bylaws. I much prefer, and I've done this in several towns recently, to create a really succinct bylaw which empowers either a personnel board or a select board to create policies. They can meet in small groups with counsel, determine what their legal obligations and responsibilities are, and then make the appropriate decision, right? That's why you're elected and appointed in the town, to help manage this for the residents. So that would be my recommendation. It is a big undertaking because you have to do a complete analysis of your bylaws to ensure they're compliant, see if they can be simply converted, or whether or not for various reasons, whether it be legal or policy reasons, they need to be adjusted. Because I think the way to get that kind of bylaw change through town meeting is to say, don't worry, we're prepared. As soon as you have this bylaw in place, we're going to roll out these personnel policies that are much more comprehensive, much more flexible, much more accessible to employees such that they can go through a tabulated book, posted online all in one place, and understand what their obligations and benefits are. So in their obligations and benefits are. So in that way, I would propose something like that. But be mindful, you're bound on the salary plan. So specific, your step plan with all of your grade classifications for job titles, that does have to go through town meeting. And that's pursuant to general law. It's section 108A, which empowers towns to create these grades and classifications and set the salaries accordingly. That has to go through town meeting. You can provide flexibility to, for example, your personnel director with approval or without approval, however you think is best appropriate for the town, to give flexibility in terms of internal hiring and if they go on a particular step, or trying to attract new candidates to the town to make the package attractive so they don't have to necessarily start on step 1. So you can make it flexible, but the scale, mins, maxes, have to be approved by town meeting.
Let me just ask a follow-up on that. So, and I'm a big proponent of handbooks, and I have a question about that later. But so in the private sector, if we have handbooks, you can get, putting aside the fact that sick leave is not wages, so you can take that away, that's fine. But you still, in the private sector, are subject to an implied contract claim, a breach of contract claim. Now here, where it's in a bylaw, have you seen any kind of claim like that in the municipal setting?
No, where an employee brings a claim because of a change in benefit, no, I have not seen that. And I have probably 15 different towns now that I've represented, which have implemented changes to benefits. So I haven't seen that. And I know too, in the past, and it wasn't from your labor council, there was a hesitancy with personnel policies because and Mr. Purple explained this to me, that it was this person's perspective that somehow you're transferring at-will employees to employees with more rights to keep their jobs, right? Because of the reasons you articulated, Barry, an implied contract, right? So, and you see that claim arise in the private sector all the time. Here's why I'm not worried about this. We don't fire employees willy-nilly in the town of Southborough or any towns. Why? Because they have, as public employees, protection under case law saying that they have a property interest. Unlike in the private sector, they have a property interest in their job. So we're already bound to articulate a reason for letting someone go. It could be financial, it could be layoffs, that's easy. But if you're terminating an employee, you have to substantiate that there's cause. Now, there are gradations of cause. You can have just cause, you can have good cause, you can have cause. But we're not following the same rules as the private sector. So this whole idea of at-will employment in the public sector, I think I wouldn't put a lot of water in that because of the constraints we have in terms of termination.
All right, before I ask any more, Dorianne, do you have questions?
Actually, have a question I'm just wondering about. So we're taking a look at the benefits. We're looking at the vacation accrual rate. We're looking at the sick time issues. When you have an employee who's been with the town for a long time, and so we have a large number of employees that were hired under a certain contract. There's, you know, you can accrue this much vacation, you have sick time, personal time. If we make a change in our policy, I want to make sure that what they've accrued is protected and that they're not going to lose any of their benefits. So they should be grandfathered in, and to make sure that these employees, their hard work and everything they've done in the past is protected. They can't lose those. But can we actually change the policy? So say if we have someone with 5 weeks vacation, we probably have 1 or 2, and they get 5 weeks of vacation a year and they're allowed to accrue. I think right now the 5 weeks, they can bring it into the next year. If we change that policy to, okay, you're only allowed to bring over 2 weeks, is that going to be a problem that we've changed it starting next year going forward, even though they were hired under this other scenario? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, so, and I think your prior labor council submitted a really comprehensive memo on that topic. So particular to vacation, remember, vacation under the Wage Act is compensable. It's not, even if you fire someone, if they have accrued time on the books, you have to pay that out. So I think there really is a good argument in terms of vacation to say that that's accrued and can't be taken away with a retrospective policy. So, and you raised 2 issues. There's one thing about removing the benefits that have already accrued. And the second issue is, which you can't do for vacation. The second issue is, and this could apply to sick and vacation, is to essentially grandfather, and that word isn't appropriate anymore, but I haven't found a good substitute, grandfather employees into a benefit and apply the new policy prospectively to new employees. So 2 separate things, because there could be on the vacation side, if I have 5 weeks on the books and I was always allowed to carry it, and now I'm saying I can only carry 3, so then I lose 3 weeks. That's a lot different than saying, well, for next year, then I'm not going to let you carry that forward because you haven't yet accrued that vacation for FY. Let's see, we're in FY 22 now, so FY 23. So on a prospective basis, they'll know that they can't carry that vacation forward, but we're not taking away their existing bank, if that makes sense. And it's weird in the math because it's like, are you calling a day day A as opposed to just a day, but you would maintain that bank for that person, but not allow them to continue to carry their new vacation forward. You could do it like that, or you could grandfather them and say those employees who are allowed to carry 5 weeks are still allowed to carry 5 weeks until they separate from the town.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're protecting the benefits of the longtime employees, that they've accrued all of these benefits and they've worked really hard.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we don't have anyone who loses anything.
And the grandfathering approach is a super common approach to kind of slowly easing into this pretty radical change, right? Because people came into the job with a certain expectation, and you don't want to be midway through, or even worse, at the tail end of your career, and the benefits are suddenly changed. So the grandfathering is a really common way to address that issue. And it's the simplest way, to be honest.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
All right, switching gears a bit. So I sat in on part of your discussion with the Board of Health about where they wanted to place, where they wanted to contract or SAP employees, and you introduced me to Chapter 111.
Yeah.
So my question is this. So we're going to be asked in a meeting to set a salary for a position that we are going to be putting into the SAP. And I want to be clear, my question is hypothetical. I'm not suggesting how I'm going to vote on that. But let's say, for argument's sake, that I say no. I think that's too high. We want to set it at X. They want Y. I would only set it at X. If I read Chapter 111 correctly, they can just go ahead and set it at Y.
Yeah. So boards of health and these other boards that have statutory authority to set salaries, and obviously the language of the statute is pretty clear in 111F. It uses the S word, shall, and they shall set the salary. So a bylaw, which wasn't consistent with the board's decision pursuant to statutory authority, would, in my mind, that would not be a valid bylaw. So, because you can't supersede their authority by bylaw. So, because of the complicating factors of having multiple bodies set salaries, and that could be compliance with law, right? We have to comply, and we're going to be talking about this in a minute, comply with MEPA, the Equal Pay Act. And who's better to deal with MEPA compliance but the personnel board, who's in charge of all personnel and can do a kind of global assessment of positions. The complicating factor about these bodies is there is no cohesive approach to salaries. And the way towns get around that is they either do a special act or a charter, which divests the board of the authority under 111 to set the salaries. Hopefully everything works out hunky-dory and most people can convince each other of the reasons for setting salaries in particular ways, and it can be justified legally. So hopefully, and typically it's not a problem, but where you have those compliance issues and you see a sort of systemic problem, that's the way to solve it, but you can't solve it through bylaw.
Okay, and you anticipated my concern is the MEPA concern that, we have no control and we run into problems, but okay, I just wanted to get clarification on that. The last point, 2 points on NEPA. Now that we're on NEPA, we've corresponded about how we move forward with the NEPA review that was conducted by prior Labor Council. And I wondered if you had any thoughts, suggestions about the best way for us to move forward on that.
Yeah, so I have to say, in terms of the substantive content of the letter, I agree completely with every issue spotted. And what Tim had done was he outlined, I think, 2 or 3 positions or categories where there were discrepancies. And luckily, those discrepancies, he described it as de minimis in one, and I'd say most of them were fairly small discrepancies in salaries. So it's not your typical private sector where someone's making $50,000 more, the man is making $50,000 more than the woman or whatever, and they're in the exact same job. So in that sense, it's really good, but we don't know what that threshold, what that delta is allowed under law. It's not so clearly defined. But I think, and I struggle with this with municipalities because these jobs are really different. And that's one of the questions that MEPA asks. Are the jobs different? Are they similar, performing similar functions? And you can say, okay, I have 5 people that work for me, and that person has 5 people that work for them. And are they similar though? What do they do? What are their experiences? Do they work inside? Do they work outside? Do they work at night? Do they work flexible hours? There are so many factors. And what an assessor does compared to a collector, my head spins. It's not the same as you have HR department in the private sector, and everyone pretty much does the same, but you have 300 employees, so you need 5 HR people. You know, it's not as easily analyzed. So what I suggest for these positions rather, is let's take a deeper dive, look at their job descriptions, and you could have, I could do this, or Vanessa or Mark could do this. Let's meet with the individuals and really talk about what their experiences, what their responsibilities are, and how they're working to determine really if they are similar. Because that was the to-do list of Tim.
Right.
These are the 2 that we have to look at.
Okay, and I agree with that. And I think what we need to do is essentially delegate this to the personnel director to move forward with the review and see what, if anything, and then to come back to the board and say, possibly we need to adjust this person's compensation by X, and we'd act on that. What we were trying to avoid doing before the personnel board was making, frankly, the document a public document, not having a discussion about the contents of the document itself, airing that in the public setting. But I think if we proceed that way, if we just say, Mark, you take it and then come back to us with whatever needs to be done, I think that's the way to go. We're running out of time. Just one quick point on handbooks. And this is something this committee has been pushing for some number of years, for the town to develop a handbook. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot at the moment, but I'd ask that you and Mark sit down and come up with a timetable for how long it will take for you to come back to our committee, to our board, with a proposed handbook for us to see, so that at our next meeting, Mark can say, okay, we will have something for you by X date. Because
2026. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, the good thing about this, Mr. Chairman, is that a lot of things in municipal there's nothing recreating the wheel. So you've got a lot of other communities out there that are a little more cutting edge than we are, based on bigger staff, more experience, and we can take some of those and we can make them into something that fits for Southborough. So it's just a matter of hunt and peck as to what we need and go from there.
Okay.
Agreed. And I have samples, so we can, Mark, Vanessa and I can coordinate for sure.
Okay, so you'll come back, someone will come back at the next meeting and give us a date.
Yes.
Okay, that's agreed. All right, anyone else? Anyone have anything more for Kate?
Just Barry, one quick, hopefully quick follow-on. Kate, tell me if it's longer than a quick follow-up. Is we're actually discussing our review of positions and grading, and is our salary scale fit for purpose, and we have 3 vendors that are proposing on that. Can you
Okay.
just remind us of what our requirements are or are not to do this? Like, because I think there's some conflicting information out there. I thought it was every 4 years, but I've heard different things, and I just wanted to hear kind of what the requirement is and whether this relates into the MIPA conversation. we
Yeah,
just discussed.
I want to say under MIPA, and you're calling me the carpet here and remembering a particular number, but I want to say it was 3. My recollection is 3 years for MIPA to take a look at your salaries, but I could be wrong on that. So why don't I shoot you an email, Jason, to give you that exact time, because I would have to look it up. I'm
But
sorry.
basically, there is a requirement to do it.
Yeah, I think they I don't even know if it's a requirement or if it's a recommendation to ensure that you're compliance, right? Because that self-audit is more recommended, that you can use that as a defense to say, hey, listen, we undertook this in a good faith attempt to ensure we were compliant. But I can get you that exact language via email.
Yeah, and Jason, it's in section 16E of the SAP that we have to do it no less often than every federal election year.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, Barry, is that was the language I remembered from our own bylaw. And I just know that this has been punted in the budget a few years, right?
Yeah,
So I just didn't know why that had happened, but that's more of obviously a policy discussion for the board. But I just wanted to see what we're required to do from outside Southborough perspective. And we obviously have our own bylaw that we should abide by as well.
okay. All right, we have to move on, but Kate, thank you so much for your time and information. We very
Thank
much
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for having me. I really loved coming.
Well, hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye
All
now.
right, take
Bye.
care. Okay, we're on to interviews with the salary consultants, and for technical reasons, I guess we decided we need to have all of them on at one time. Right, Vanessa?
I'll
So-
move them over now. Okay,
Okay,
you're all set.
looks like we have everyone. Welcome to you all. Why don't you each introduce yourselves for the record, starting with Ms. Granfield.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Granfield from Municipal Resources. Pleased to be here.
Okay, Ms. Corbo.
Good morning. My name is Libby Corbo. I'm from the Collins Center at UMass Boston. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much.
And our last guest,
Hi, yes, hi, I'm Joellen Catamartori, and I'm from GovHR USA in Illinois, and good morning to all of you.
morning. Let me start with the first question. So you saw that we asked for 2 separate bids, if you will. One where the town would collect comparable compensation data, and one where you would do it. Can you each run through sort of what the pros and cons are for the town? Obviously, the pro is we save some money, but from your perspective, is there some negative in our doing that? Why don't we start with Joellen? Why don't we start with you?
Sure, okay. Right, the pro is, of course, you'd save some money, and if you do go down that road, we are prepared to prepare all of the survey documents for you to save you that time. I think another con would be following up with the other communities, inputting all of the information into the computer, into a spreadsheet or something to then give back to the consultant. So it would be time consuming on your end. The system that we have set up, would populate a lot of that, but there still would be some work on the town side. So I think that that's the only con. And the other thing, when you send out the surveys, not everybody responds, so you have to do the follow-up there. You could get some collective bargaining agreements or pay plans, from the other communities and input it yourself. But again, that's making contact, and it's just more time for the town staff that the consultant could absorb for you.
Okay, Ms. Corbo, the beat.
Yes, thank you. Joellen did a great job of highlighting some of the not necessarily, pitfalls, but cons of conducting the salary survey yourself. You certainly can do it. For many years, I worked as a municipal labor and employment attorney. And during our collective bargaining negotiations for the communities that I represented, they would perform their own salary survey and use it in the negotiations. One of the things that wasn't mentioned by Joellen that I think, is something to consider is objectivity of having a third party conduct a salary study. It removes the idea of the town being involved in the process. And sometimes that gives a level of credibility to the study that isn't necessarily there when the town does that, for better or for worse, justified or unjustified. The Collins Center is a local organization. We are a nonprofit. So this is something that we've done for many communities, and we find that level of objectivity to be helpful to the end results.
Thank you. Carol, anything to add?
Yes, I'd agree with both Joellen and Libby. They both brought up the majority of reasons. Cost, of course, is one that you would gain. The objectivity, I think, is key, because many times I know I've worked with both unions and non-unions, and many times they want that third party to come in and work from those numbers because they aren't slanting it one way or another. And the other thing I would indicate is, if you would decide to do it yourself, I'd want to ensure you'd be collecting the right data for us to then make the final determinations for working with the plans and such. And the follow-up, of course, is time consuming. So depending on what time you could commit to that, but I think all those factors you should consider.
Okay. Jason, Dorian, questions?
I do not have
Okay.
any. I thought the responses were very clear in writing.
Okay. Dorian?
No questions. I'm good.
Okay, I have some more. So look, Joellen, let me ask you this, because this occurred to me. So you did, and I think it was fourth quarter 2017 when you were commissioned, I guess, to do, was it Schedule A and Schedule C? Anyway, it's 4 years plus or so. My expectation would be that 80% of the job descriptions that you would have looked at and graded then would not have changed in the interim period. And if your system hasn't changed, would you still need to go through the analysis of those job descriptions?
No,
If that's
we would
clear.
not. Yeah, I think one of the things that we've done for the town over the years that we've worked with you is we set up the initial classification and compensation system, and then we've helped you maintain it. So when there have been changes, we've reviewed them for you. You know, we don't charge you for that. We've helped along the way. And so if you look at it and that there's some holes, then we could look at that objectively and make a recommendation. Or like you said, we could look at everything all over again. But the job descriptions are good. And as you know, through the process of job evaluation and filling out a questionnaire, we can make those updates. So sometimes we learn through talking with employees that things have changed. And then we can make a recommendation on where it needs to be updated. So I don't think anything, unless there's something brand new, is going to be very different. And so it probably would be pretty efficient, I think. So if you change your mind, said we only want you to look at certain positions, then that's pretty straightforward as well.
Okay. And a more general question. So when you're looking at data from other towns and positions and you see job titles, how do you know without seeing the job descriptions that you're comparing apples to apples? If that's clear, how do you know that what this inspector does in town A is really the same as what inspector in town B does without seeing the job description? So let me start with you, Carol, this time.
Okay, you're exactly right there. When we do the surveys, they're typically a benchmark position. It could be an inspector or whatnot. Where we find the differences is in talking with both the employee so you can compare as closely as possible, apples with apples, because especially in small to medium size communities, it does vary. Many times one will wear several hats and another will only wear one. And those are things we like to take a look at. So we either will learn some of that in discussion or follow up, especially if the salary rates are significantly different. We'll follow up and have a discussion with the community, look at their job description to see what the differences are. And then in the factoring method for internal equity, many times that's where a change will occur if your position is quite a bit different than another position in a similar community.
Okay, Libby, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. Carol again hit on some of the key points. And I'll just say it. I think it is I don't know that I've ever had a position line up 100% in terms of duties between community. And I think it's important to pace expectations that way. For many of the factors that Carol mentioned, it's just not possible to have an exact replica of every duty performed by one job and by one employee mirrored exactly in another community. So what we try to do is focus on the essential functions that fall under the title. In many cases, this is somewhat standard depending on the title, but through the process of interviews with employees or reviewing their job description, as the case may be, we might say your job duties don't align with your job title. And I think that that's where some of the fleshing out in stage one needs to be done. And then as we reach out to other communities, generally, like I said, duties are standardized. Essential functions anyways are standardized by title. The specificity of the job descriptions of the job duties being mirrored in another community, you have to pace expectations when it comes to trying to find an exact replica for positions. That's likely not going to happen. So as long as employees understand that what we are doing is aligning their essential functions with their title, and titles tend to be somewhat standardized through communities, that is helpful in the process.
Joellen, anything to add?
So I agree with both Carol and Libby. What I would add is that, the internal equity, the job factor evaluation and the job analysis is what drives your system, and it's unique to Southborough. And that's why you have employees fill out questionnaires and you have consultants talk with those people, because it does allow to bring in those nuances that you're talking about. I agree. I think if you're the town accountant and you go to another town, there's a town accountant, and they're going to say, well, I might do more things than this person in Westboro, say. But by talking with that employee, we can learn about the nuances of the job. And then the analogy I always say to the employees is the high tide lifts all boats. So we will grade the position for the most complex task. And that allows you to create your own internal equity in Southborough, taking into account what's happening in other communities. The other thing in the salary survey, you're defining the jobs in the survey, that might be another reason why to use the consultant. In our salary surveys, we define those benchmark positions. And so we can actually try and make sure that there is the best apples to apples comparison. And then the other thing I tell employees is that, if you feel as if you do more things in Southborough, we're going to look at your job. We're going to look at that overall complexity. We're going to grade it that way. And Southborough may value it a little bit higher than other communities because of that. But if you think about the future and you think about your own career, aspirations and what you may want to do, if you have a broader scope of responsibility, that would make you more marketable in the future if you did decide to go someplace. So I think there's a lot of positives to that, and there's a lot of positive things you can say to the employees, but you learn all of that through the job analysis and the job evaluation process, and then you can make it unique to Southborough.
Okay, I have two more questions and then I'll let you go. I think you all have talked about the need to interview employees during this process. I guess my question is, how do you identify, you're not going to interview all employees. How do you identify which employees you're going to talk to? And let me start with Libby on that.
Thank you. Well, the questionnaires are essential. There are some occasions when we're building a job description from scratch that we will speak to every employee or their supervisor. Sometimes we can speak to a supervisor about a multitude of employees. So that's another tool that we have to explore the job duties. But what we look for when we go over what I look for when I go over the questionnaire is to see whether there are any duties that seem to be unclear, that seem not to fit under that job title, because that's what I'm looking for, is something that might be outside the standard expected job duties. And I want to clarify that with the employee. I want to make sure that I fully understand what it is that they're doing and what's being asked of them and what the expectations are for the role. So really, it's those outliers in the questionnaire that flag. For example, I had a wire inspector who had on their questionnaire that they manage plow routes. That is someone I need to speak to. I need to understand why the wire inspector is also managing plow routes. So those types of things are keys that we look for when deciding what employees we're going to speak to, or whether we're going to reach out to a supervisor. But that's just one example. I mean, there are other things that come up in questionnaires that are relevant that would make me say, I want to speak to this employee and find out what's going on there. Sometimes they say that their job duties have been reassigned. That's something that would make me reach out to that employee and say, let's talk a little bit about this. It indicates that there might be a reorganization of duties or reallocation of responsibilities. And that's important in knowing when we evaluate a job description. So really it is reviewing the questionnaire, taking the information from anyone we've spoken with at the town, and then identifying the employees that we really do need to speak to, or the supervisors, because sometimes it's important to speak with both individuals.
Okay, thank you. Carol?
Yes, Libby covered a lot of the avenues that we look at as well. One thing we do in the beginning, when we have an orientation session with sometimes it's twofold. Sometimes it'll be the department heads, so they get a good flavor for what we need to find out. And then sometimes it'll be all the employees. And that gives them a better idea and understanding of what we're looking for. We always like to have at least one in each classification to interview. And also, we found if a particular employee wants to be interviewed, by all means, we'll interview them, because whether we need to, and it's very clear cut in a questionnaire, we want to extend that courtesy to them because they want to tell us about their position to make sure we get it right. The questionnaires are helpful, but you have to expand. I remember one time in a public works operation, all the employee put down was he picked up dead animals. Well, clearly that wasn't the essential function of his job. So we wanted to gain more. And also, we find the orientations helpful because many times the supervisors are finding that our employees, when we talk to them or look at their questionnaire, are doing way beyond what they're supposed to do, or in some cases not doing enough. So I think the questionnaires, interviewing employees as many as you want us to, as well as if an employee wants to be interviewed, and at least one in a classification. Sometimes if there's several, we find it's been helpful to have a joint, either filling out the questionnaire or joint interview. Some people are better at speaking, portraying what they do better than others. So as a group, that works many times.
Thank you. Joellen?
Right, and I agree again with what Carolyn Levy said, and what I would add to it is, you know, you have 47 classifications in schedules A and C. So we always speak with at least one person assigned to each classification. And I tell employees during the orientation that if you have your own job title, you can't get out of the interview. You have to talk with me or somebody else from GovHR. But if you share a title, we will do a group interview. And if we ask the town really to determine who that is, and I say, tell your supervisor, if you really want an interview, we will interview you, you know, regardless. If you are okay to defer to your colleagues, that's okay. Let your supervisor know that. But we work with the town. So if we do a group interview, you know, our preference would be to talk with somebody that's more seasoned, somebody that's kind of mid-tenure, and somebody that's newer, because people may have different perspectives about the work that they do. And we also ask every employee to fill out a questionnaire, regardless of whether or not they're interviewed, because we will read everything. Everyone's perspective is important. Everyone, you want them to feel engaged in the process. But we won't turn anyone away, you know. So if we usually do up to 3 people in a group interview, if there's a 4th person, or say you have 6 admins and they all really want to talk with us, we'll do 2 group interviews, you know. Or you may say, and another benefit of doing this type of study periodically is, you know, you can look at things organizationally. So at the beginning, if you say, Joellen, you know, this is an area where we're thinking that things have really changed, you know, post-COVID, there's so many different things going on now. Could you separate these 2 admins out, for example, into 2 different interviews, because we think one of these jobs needs to be reclassified. So we learn those expectations up front, and then we'll adjust the interview schedule, you know, depending on what you need. But, you know, every classification has an interview, and then if there's multiple people, there's group interviews. So that's our general approach to it.
All right. Going back to my first question, so how common is it for a city or town to collect their own salary data as we propose? Is it something you see all the time? Is it rare? So Joellen, I'll start with you.
I don't think I've ever had that happen. And we've done hundreds of studies, many in Massachusetts. So it's not common. And we talked a little bit about it before, but, you know, designing that salary survey, which we'll still do regardless of what you decide to do, defining the benchmark positions to make sure you can do that apples to apples comparison is really important. You know, so it does take a little bit of time to determine which are those benchmarks. I mean, you've got 47, so you can get pretty close to getting information for all of them. And that's a good thing. Only the positions that are really unique to Southborough, maybe we wouldn't be able to get a lot of information for. But it just takes a little bit of time. And honestly, it's usually part of the process. So it's not the norm at all. And in my experience that a community would do it on their own. But if you wanted to save, even some money, if you wanted us to do it, if there's some other areas, if there's pay plan information we need collected and you could help with that, we'll work with you on it, depending on how you want to slice it. If you want to do maybe a little bit of it and not the whole thing. So, but again, my experience is that that's not the norm.
Okay, Carol?
Yeah, I would agree. And many times that's why they're contracting out, because they want to have the expertise and have that credibility of someone not within the community. Many times we'll receive surveys that were recently done, whether it's, police and fire, they've done their own survey and they have the data. So we'll take the data, but we will still do it because many times it may be slanted one way and not as specific as we want it. But I would say, agree, there may be other areas you could modify if you're looking to save some costs, but I think it's important for us to get the data we need to give you the final information so it's all relevant.
Libby?
So I would say that I've never had a community that we've worked with as a consultant decide to parse out the salary part and do it themselves. It just seems that once they've decided to hire a consultant, perhaps we are the reason why, that is part of the process. I will say in my prior role as a municipal and labor attorney, working at a firm in Boston, I did see cities and towns that would use their own salary gathering information as part of their negotiation process, being a labor and employment attorney. And that was done more in a piecemeal type of way with a targeted outcome of using it for negotiations. It wasn't done in a comprehensive way that these studies are intended for. So I would draw that distinction, but there were times that cities and towns would do that. I haven't seen it once cities and towns have made the decision to hire a consultant. They seem to lump the salary survey in. We did parse out those duties as part of our proposal for you because that was requested, but it is unusual for that to happen.
Okay. And Joel, and I know you have to leave, and I only have another question or so, but for you, time frame and how long would it take for you to do this?
If it's the full class and comp, it's usually 3 to 4 months. And we, I think one of the things that's important about that is making sure that we set the timeline up at the beginning, which is what we always do, and make sure that things work with you. And if there has to be check-ins with the personnel board, just get that all scheduled early so everybody has an idea of when the milestones are. And if we do that and we can stick to the timeline, that's how long it will take. And it just depends on when we can get it started.
Okay. And before I go to the others, again, since you have to leave and we're wrapping up anyway, give you an opportunity to say anything else you want before we leave.
Okay. Yes, I was just getting a call, but it's totally fine. I just want to thank you for considering us to continue to work with the town. I think it's been a good relationship. And we're very familiar with the town. We're familiar with the positions, several of the employees that we've worked with. So that I think is a bonus. The other thing is we've done your comparable community analysis. We can always rerun those comps to make sure that they haven't changed. And I think that's a really important piece of how the communities are determined, and make sure that that whole ability to pay and that financial analysis is done. And that's part of what we do for you through the study, regardless of whether or not you do the salary survey on your own. We have to make sure that those are set and you're comfortable with that. Because when we make a recommendation to the personnel board and eventually to finance committee and to town meeting, when you bring it forward, it really has to be founded on that ability to pay. So we've done that, but we're willing to continue to keep that updated for you, which is not reflected in here, but it is part of it. So I just wanted to mention that as well. But, you know, I do, again, appreciate you considering us for this study.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time this
Okay,
morning.
and I'm sorry I have to jump off, but
No
thank you.
problem. Thank you. All right, Libby, first of all, timeframe, and then I'll give you an opportunity as well to add anything you would like.
Thank you so much. So timeframe would be similar. I will say, you know, it is one of the things about being a local agency is we're very cognizant of municipal schedules. So we are entering town meeting time. We are entering, you know, we are in budget season. So the part of this process, at least the salary survey part of it, requires information from other municipalities that don't work for us. We have great relationships that our team has built in Massachusetts with local leaders, which helps facilitate us to be able to get some of that information. But in all fairness, those municipalities don't work for us. So it's a lot of polite asking, follow-up, and a little bit of nagging / begging that gets the result at the end of the day. So we try to factor that into our timeline. Given the spring season, it's probably closer to 4 months than 3, because like I said, that information comes from other municipalities and we like to be respectful of their time as well. So as we're planning this study, that is something that we consider. The only other thing that I would add is just saying that being a nonprofit, being a division of UMass in the Commonwealth, our sole goal is to help municipalities run more effectively and efficiently. We have no other motivation. So we are really here to help you, and we want to work with the town to help improve your operations. So thank you for giving us the chance to be here today and to talk a little bit about what we can offer to the town.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Carol.
Okay.
The time frame is in your proposal. I think was pretty much the 4 months.
Sure, it was 3 to 4 months, depending on, the only thing what we found in some studies that we've done recently, and I don't know about Southborough, but sometimes they're in the process of looking at reorganizing or revamping a particular department or division. And what I can say is if that is happening in any, to be helpful to the community, many times we'll work with that. So the new plan will incorporate that if we can, if it's at a stage where rather than having it dated and not including the new information. So we would incorporate that as well. But I would say it would take 3 to 4 months to gain. And everyone is in budget and town meeting right now, but we typically try to get the most information we can with all of our resources and team. And I would say in closing, thank you for looking at our proposal. We love the opportunity. We specialize only in municipal governments. And while you've had Joelle's company working on it and been satisfied with it, I'm sure sometimes it's good to have a new, fresh set of eyes, look at an operation, and we might find some areas that we could have additional information and focus on that maybe hasn't been looked at. But appreciate the opportunity. And if you have any other questions following this, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to get back to you with it.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you coming before us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we should talk about next steps. We have reference lists from MRI and the Collins Center that we can communicate with. I mean, I'm not sure we need to check Joe Ellen's references She has a long history of working with the town. I don't think we're in a rush to make a decision on this unless anyone feels differently. We can certainly put that off, and I guess I'll volunteer to contact the references unless anyone else wants to jump in and say, no, I want to do it.
I'll gladly endorse your volunteerism for that.
I will too.
The one, Barry, I think it'd be help, I didn't have a lot of questions because, and I know that's unusual, because I had, just based on their written responses, I had some strong feelings. I just think I want to get out there now because it may make your job easier, at least from my view, in terms of where you go with your reference checks. So I'm going to start, I'm going in no particular order, but MRI was the firm that we used for the fire chief assessment center. Well, in the assessment when we hired Chief Achilles, obviously their representatives were different. Obviously had a fire service background. But my main concern there was almost all, not every single one of their references were for cities and towns in the state of New Hampshire and not Massachusetts. And while I don't like to draw borders, I think we all can acknowledge that cities and towns in Massachusetts just do not operate always in the same way that cities and towns in New Hampshire. We all know there's a very different state income tax, which then leads to different funding of local municipalities. So I just didn't think, I'm leaving price off to the side for a second. I just did not think the references are candidly comparable other than the few Massachusetts towns they listed. Then you compare that with Collins Center, which not only has done work for some of our comparable communities, but other communities that would be on the periphery of a comparable community. And that just struck me. Again, leaving price off to the side. And then I have many different thoughts and ideas of how to deal with the price because no price totally fits our budget. We can save that to once we kind of agree on a path forward. But I would not endorse any vendor that would use any town staff to compile data because I think there's inherent conflict and bias in that. And I think we need to acknowledge that we currently are in uncharted waters from an employment perspective. That's not just to Southborough, that's everywhere. Just look at poor Jay Montijo in the trying to find a senior IT specialist that the town, pretty unanimously endorsed last year. So I just think a fresh set of eyes is really going to be important here. We're asking each of our departments, no matter which department they are, to do more with less. That's not going to change. Let's be realistic. Obviously, I know it's no surprise to anyone that I follow the budget discussions very closely. And, we have this discussion every single year, right? You hear it at the select board, you hear it at advisory, you hear it everywhere. Do we really need this new position? Can't someone do it? Can't we be creative with how we do it? I think we also need to think about, if someone is taking on additional roles. I know we have abilities to adjust and grade, but did that department head actually bring it forward, et cetera? So I would really advocate for a true fresh look here because of just where we're at as a community, locality, a state, in a country from an employment perspective. And I think it may help us with not only attracting candidates if we have the right job description, the right classification, but helping us potentially think about, like, are these roles fit for purpose? And can we be deploying our resources in a better way that actually may give career advancement opportunities? Some people that may be in a 1 or 2 person department that are kind of, I'll call it, stuck until there's sort of a retirement or someone moves on to another position. So that's kind of where I'm at. So that would candidly eliminate GovHR from consideration. And I think I've drawn some comparisons between MRI and Collins. So I'll pause there.
Okay. Dorianne, you want to chime in?
I am in complete agreement with Jason. I believe personally that we need a brand new, fresh set of eyes. So I would not vote for GovHR for that reason only. Pricing wise, I mean, the MRI? The MRI, they're the highest. And again, the references are mostly in New Hampshire. I like the idea of a nonprofit. I like the idea of it's coming from UMass. I looked at, I'm favoring more the Collins Center for the reason they're local. We had a lot of issues with Joellen being out of state, trying to get together, a bunch of different things. She did a great job, but there were some challenges for us the last time they did that. So I like the idea of the nonprofit, the UMass. We need to be cognizant of the cost for the taxpayers. And Libby came across as, you know, she knows her stuff, and I think she'll do a great job. So that's where I'm leaning based off of reading the 3 reports, you know, what they've all handed in. So that's just my take.
Okay, and all fair, and I don't disagree with any of it. And in fact, the reason I was asking Joellen about the fact that 80% of the job descriptions are the same, I'm pretty sure it would be exactly the same as what she looked at, that I hoped she'd come back and say, well, yeah, then that would save us a lot of money in having to redo the analysis of all those job descriptions, because they already did it. We already paid for it. And I didn't hear that. And let me say a word about cost. And I'm sensitive to this, but I'm not suggesting either of you are saying this, but I certainly don't want our decision to be driven by cost, because our job is to do the best we can in reviewing, analyzing, developing the salary grade schedules. We have to be mindful of cost, but and that's certainly a factor in this, but it's not, for me, it's not the preeminent factor. And I say that not to suggest that I don't think that the Collins Center is the way to go, and it probably is the way to go. And I'm sure they're very competent at this, but I think just as a matter of due diligence, I would like to talk to some references, both of MRI and of Collins Center, and report back. And we can make a final decision on this at our next meeting. Again, we don't really have, we've got other things we do have time pressure on. This, we can put it off a month, I think, and particularly since we want to space out the payment between 2 fiscal years. We don't want them finishing and wanting payment this fiscal year. So for those reasons, what I would propose is I'll do the reference check, report back in our next meeting, and we can make a final decision at that time, if that's amenable to everybody.
A few questions on that, Barry. So are we willing to entertain a motion to eliminate GovHR from the process and select 2 finalists subject to reference checks?
I'm open to that.
I'm
Okay.
totally fine with that.
Okay, so I'll motion that in a second. But then I just want to be very clear. I think I said it like 3 or 4 times. I didn't look at the cost. I mean, I've looked at it obviously, but if we had done this as an RFQ, which we do a lot for certain services in town, as opposed to an RFP, that's what was kind of how I was driving my answer. But well, I agree, this is not something that needs to be quote unquote done for a town meeting warrant or something. I would not let this drag beyond April, because part of I'll call it my funding strategy is, you noted it in the beginning, Our expenditure report is basically zero. I think we've authorized some tuition, so we know that that's coming at some point this fiscal year. I think we have an opportunity to use the select board's policy related to line items within a year-to-year budget to cover any delta this year, which would mean that the vendor would actually have had to make enough progress to justify that accrual in our year-end financials. So I do think we want to get whoever the successful candidate is going with a statement of work or contract by mid-April, so that they can complete at least half of their work in May and June and justify the town accountant accruing this year. Because I obviously don't want to go to advisory with this. Their reserve fund's already under a lot of other pressures, and I do not support adjusting the personnel board budget for next year. But I also agree we need to spend the money wisely to get the intended result. And I think that comes down to the ultimate contract and making sure we're getting what we need.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, because I admit to being ignorant to a lot of things. So how would the billing for this generally work, Vanessa or Mark? What kind of payment schedule would there be?
Yeah, we would review that with the town accountant, but when we write the contract, I think we would just have to describe it in phases and the cost per phase, so it were spaced out.
Okay, so it's to Jason's point, it sounds like if we make a decision at our April meeting and get a contract done, you would hope that by the end of June, they would probably be at least halfway through the project.
Yeah, I would think you would put in their contract, Barry, that they should be at least 50% or 60%, whatever number we decide to complete by June 30th. And then I know Mark and I have had this conversation many times on fixed fee project invoicing, is we then have the board or committee review where that vendor is on the milestones compared to what they're proposing to bill, to make sure that it makes sense. And I think that's also good evidence, not to speak for the town accountant, but as an accountant myself, that's usually good evidence to decide whether an accrual is appropriate or not. And we can coordinate with Carla along the way. But Mark and I have been down this rodeo many times on contracts and invoicing.
And that would be specifically detailed, in phase 1 and phase 2, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Sure.
If we're going to crush and really pressure them to get half of the work done by June 30th, it seems like we're really agreeing with the first choice versus, a tie for 1 or 2. Should we maybe vote tentatively based on the outcome of the reference check to choose one and then make that decision if the references check out? Maybe just call a quick meeting to say yes and go forward and give them more time, because if you're not going to vote until April, they're really not going to get 2 months of time to get the work done. You're really giving them a very, very tight timeline. If you want half of this work done by June 30th, it's to our advantage and their advantage to maybe choose somebody now, check their references. If the references check out, then let them go forward. I mean, to wait another month for another meeting to vote on this, we seem like we're pretty much in agreement on who we want to be doing this. So, and then you could be concerned with price, you can check reference. I don't know. To me, it's a time issue. It seems a time issue. If you want 4 months of work, you want 2 done before June 30th, we need to move on this. This isn't something we can sit back on.
I'd be okay with an interim meeting if Barry's not comfortable moving forward today. I would be comfortable moving forward today, subject to successful reference checks. The other thing I'll point out, and Mark, I'd really welcome your feedback here, is Doreen, I kind of like what you're saying, because town meeting is the first week of May. And then obviously, hopefully everyone takes a deep breath, but there would be a window there between then and when summer vacations really ramp up, that the vendor would have a chance to meet with all these employees that they're going to need to meet with, versus if we start doing this June, July, I can just see, person A is on vacation this week, person B is on vacation next week, and they're just getting haphazard access to the right employees to complete their stuff. Now, I know people take vacation in June too, but it would just give us a little more leeway with the timeline. So I don't know, Barry, what do you think?
Let me add, so we have the complicating issue with the Collins Center in that Vanessa's husband's relationship to the Collins Center, so she really can't be involved in this. So from Mark, your operations perspective, how would the interaction with the Collins Center work? Because I assume there's a fair amount of discourse between your office and whoever the consultant is as this project is ongoing.
So I think, obviously it's going to be, as you said, there's going to be coordination. We're going to need to coordinate, in terms of interviews with staff, for the consultant. We're going to need to, get regular updates on where we are with things, the metrics that Mr. Malinowski is talking about, to understand where we are in the process, make sure we stay on target. But I don't think that's an issue for our office to help handle between myself and Miss Otska and Miss Barry, even taking Miss Hale out of the picture. I think, that would be, that's, very doable. And again, once the warrant is all set in April, the beginning of April, and it's off to the printers, it really opens up the month of April as we wait for town meeting. And then we have town meeting, and then a little bit, and then after that, as Mr. Malinowski said, although I'll believe it when I see it, that exhale happens. You just don't see the possibility of that right now. But I don't think it's an issue on our end. And if you do something tentatively, subject to do a vote today to pick somebody and make it subject to, successful, contract and reference check, you absolutely can do that. That's something that the select board, does regularly as well.
I just think for timing purposes that we should make our choice, and as long as the references check out, vote to give Barry the authority to have Mark go forward with a contract. It's a time issue, and if we really want to split the budget, I think that's the most advantageous for both parties. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that bothers me, and it's no one's fault, is that we're making these decisions as the three of us, and we're missing two members on what's one of the biggest financial decisions we make. It is what it is. We have to do it. I really wish we had a fuller group to make these calls, but we don't. We have to move forward. I'm not opposed if someone wants to make a motion as you described, Dorian. I would vote in favor of it. I don't see why we would decide to spend the extra money on MRI for what I think, based on everything I can tell, will be very competent work from the Collins Center for an amount of money that fits within our established budgets. So it seems to make sense to do that. Again, that's the only thing that troubles me, is I wish we had a full complement to consider it, but we don't. So I think time requires that, other forces require that we move forward.
Yeah, I think we're doing a disservice to the employees by not advancing this forward and making sure that we're in the right spot. Barry, let me just add one thing to that. I agree. We can send the moderator, the last 5 minutes of discussion, a video as a gentle nudge. I know he's obviously been actively trying to fill the roles, but let me add this, even if 2 board members got appointed tomorrow, I don't know that it'd be fair to ask them to weigh in unless they are intimately familiar with personnel board matters and really are up to speed. There's probably one person in town, which is one of the seats we're trying to fill, that could probably actually adequately weigh in, and I don't think that person's coming back. So, I just think we would be delaying the inevitable that the 3 of us are voting and there's 2 abstentions. So, with that, I will move that, subject to successful contract negotiations and reference checks, that we select the Collins Center to perform the salary compensation survey.
Do we have to put the amount that's in the bid in that motion, Jason, or no?
We'd add for up to
the amount.
$10,000.
No,
Well, hang on. So let me withdraw the motion for a second. So Doreen, it's a good question. I think what I would do is actually, my personal vote is going to be that we have no town labor assisting with pulling any data, like in terms of like the 2 options. So it's going to be the $12,000 option, not the $10,000 option. And I feel very strongly that that needs to happen, especially given just the conversation we just had about using Mr. Purple's resources. So I was going to move for that option if we want to clarify it. Does that make
I didn't know
sense?
if we needed to, or if that's a negotiation that you don't do that in a motion. I wasn't really sure, so that's why I wanted to ask before I
Yeah, Mark,
seconded
why
your
don't you
motion.
let us
Yeah.
know?
So the one thing I will offer to that is that, I would say Ms. Hale could correct me, but maybe you don't want her to correct me given the association with the Collins Center, but Collins Center, in the times that I've had them in processes, they will tell you they are an arm of state government. They're not, required to have to be part of a bid process. They normally will not be part of a bid process. This is what we do. This is what it costs. If you want to go with us, this is the way you go. So my point being, unless we're going to change some of the things that we've asked them to do, I really think what you see is the price. I don't think really there's going to be any movement off of that. I do agree that if you do take a vote this morning, you should make sure that you do note which option you want to take. And obviously, I tend to agree with all the comments that have been made here today that to protect the process and the integrity of the process, that really, the staff shouldn't be collecting data for the consultant.
I agree. All right, so just
Right.
throw the price in your motion, then, Jason, I guess.
Did you have something, Barry, sorry?
No, go ahead.
So I will move that, subject to successful contract negotiation and reference checks, that the personnel board recommend selecting the Collins Center, option B, for a cost of $12,000 for the salary study consultant.
Second,
Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
aye.
and the chair votes aye. So that is done. Thank you all for that.
Off the agenda.
Off the agenda.
Not carrying it forward.
Okay. It doesn't get easier. We move on to SAT revisions, and let's talk about benefits first. Jason, where do we want to go in this?
So first, I know there's a lot of employees in the audience, and I know a lot of employees watch these meetings taped after the fact, and I know there were some that here that probably had to go on to deal with their day jobs. But I just wanted to acknowledge this is a very tough conversation for me. I'm sure it's a very tough conversation for all of you, but I think, I hope everyone understands it's important that we review these things. And I think some of Attorney Federoff's comments earlier in the meeting certainly validated that for at least me. I also wanted to thank the majority of the SAP employees, the full-time employees, that is, that because they're the ones that are subject to some of these benefits. that responded to the survey. It was a pretty open for a pretty limited window. We didn't actually close it down on the deadline date, but I'm not aware of any responses that came in after the deadline. That it was just a pretty overwhelming response. I think everyone's seen what's in there, and I have obviously had a few weeks to at least formulate my own thoughts on where we go from there. So I'm going to bifurcate at least my thoughts into two buckets. One is on the vacation and one is on the sick. First, as you'll see in the supplemental packet, I worked with Brian Valentine in particular to, and he did all the work, but we had some check-ins along the way to summarize the department head contracts as well as the union contracts. Everyone knows the union contracts are currently up at the end of this fiscal year, but we summarize what's on the town website, obviously the contracts that are in force to date. And, to no surprise to myself or probably anyone else on this board, there's disparity. In some instances, the SAP is more generous. In some instances, department heads have negotiated certain things that are more generous for themselves. In some cases, they're following the SAP on a lot of these things. So any changes we make would be subject to them too, and it wouldn't reopen a contract negotiation for the select board or other boards that negotiate these sort of contracts. And then obviously the unions are a bargaining unit, and that was brought out in some of the commentary from the SAP employees that they aren't a bargaining unit, so they really rely on the personnel board for some of these things. So it's clear we have disparity. It's clear that some, depending on what your what incentivizes you, you may pick one over the other, but obviously it's all very different roles. And we, the personnel board, are never going to be able to fully control any of that narrative. Our job, I think, is just to inform of where there are things so that the appropriate boards that deal with those things, mainly the select board, but there are a few other elected boards that have to deal with this, are just informed. So I'm going to start with vacation. I personally am not ready to do anything on this. This is obviously, in my opinion, the touchier subject, and the one that certainly attracts people to the town, and obviously is a protected benefit as well, as we've learned from Attorney Fedorov multiple times at this point. What I would like to recommend, though, on the vacation is, and I think I would recommend doing this in policy, unless Barry or Dorian, you disagree, that for any SAP employee come this July 1st, 2022, that intends to carry over more than 2 weeks of their vacation, that they just submit a couple sentence email to either the personnel director or the personnel board, just explaining why they need to carry more than those 2 weeks over. Now, some employees are only allowed to carry 2 weeks over, but we have some employees that are able to carry up to 6 weeks over based on their tenure at the town. And I would recommend that it not be an approval process, but more a data gathering exercise so that the personnel board can more fully analyze this topic in the next fiscal year of whether we really do want to implement a change. So again, this would not be taking away a benefit. It would just be providing us data so that we understand why people aren't using their full vacation in a year. And, is it job demands? Because I think we have a responsibility to make sure that if there are circumstances that are limiting someone's ability to take vacation versus whether someone just banks it, I think it will also inform us whether we are allowing folks to accrue the right benefits, right? Do we need to be more aggressive? And I know I've said this before with how many hours we're allotting for vacation, but claw back over time how much someone can carry over. I think it's obviously you're gonna have different opinions, whether someone's a newer tenured employee or someone that has 20 plus years. But again, I think where I'm at is I want to gather some more data. And I think it came across in at least one survey, if not more. I would strongly recommend, and I'd be happy to lead this effort if you two are inclined, that the personnel board meet and set up like a committee to discuss this with SAP employees and just get their thoughts, get kind of all the thoughts on paper, understand where different tenured employees are And we also have different demographics of employees depending upon their job role, their age, et cetera, to just understand, what people are looking for, to see if we can't craft something that may be more fit for purpose moving forward. Because I got to be honest, we need to obviously respect and honor everyone's current situation and benefits. And I don't think anyone's looking to take anything away from anyone that's accrued, nor can we on the vacation side. But I think we also need to be proactive and think ahead to employees we're trying to attract in the future. And I think there's a balance that needs to occur there. So that's my recommendation related to vacation. In summary, that we recommend through policy that we get a written description of why they're carrying over more than 2 weeks, not to pass judgment, but more to pass data. It's not saying that it won't be approved or anything like that. And 2, to form a working group of SAP employees that represent a diverse background of departments and tenure within the town to think about next steps, particularly related to vacation.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is, and really about both vacation and sick leave, is what you've done, and thank you for all the time and energy you put into this, because we certainly, I can speak for myself, but I think we on the personnel board were not aware, we haven't taken a look at this, certainly since I've been on the board, which is 4 years, that what's become clear through your work is that what we're offering is somewhat out of whack with what comparable towns are doing in certain areas. And so we've identified, problem is not the right word, but we've identified an imbalance. And I think we have to then think about, okay, what do we do? I don't think personally, I'm not ready to say, okay, we have to fix it this way or this way or this way. But I think you're exactly right. We have to sit down with some group of employees and talk about, okay, this is what we've learned. We're not looking to, as you said, we're not looking to take things away, but we have to figure out moving forward how we can get ourselves more in line with the towns we're competing with for talent, and at the same time being fair to employees. How do we do that? And that's a process. So I agree with what you're proposing. I don't see a downside to having employees just not justify why they're not taking vacation, but explain so we can understand that and factor that in as we're trying to think about what, if any, changes we want to make to the vacation accrual that we're doing going forward. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I agree with what you are suggesting.
I agree. There you go. So do you want to do 2 different motions, Jason? Because they're separate ideas. So do you want to do 2 different motions and then we'll vote those in?
The creation of the committee, I personally don't think needs a motion unless you want to do it to formalize it. I think the discussion, as long as you're comfortable with me working with Mark to figure out how we would get in,
Okay.
he can delegate us. I don't know, did you agree with that, Barry? On
Yeah,
that piece?
I don't think we need a formal motion on that.
Okay. I do think it would be helpful to summarize this piece of the conversation to the SAP employees. So I could also work with Mark or Barry, you could work with him if you think it's more appropriate to come from the chair, to just summarize like what we're looking to do, and just provide an update. Because I think always communicating and upfront is helpful, as opposed to obviously a game of telephone where someone misconstrues what we're actually looking to do. Obviously the tape won't lie, but I just think there should be just a communication for those that choose not to tune into these sorts of discussions.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with Mark in putting together a draft that can go out to employees,
Okay.
covering what we've talked about
Okay.
today and what, what we've learned and explaining the process we've gone through in doing this. Isn't just a knee-jerk reaction. Let's do something. We're in the middle of a process. We're not at the end, but this is what we've done. These are the next steps we'd like to take to move that along. That's the way I'd explain it.
And I'm happy to jump on a committee to do whatever. If you need a body, I'm happy to jump on that too. So just tell me what you need me to do.
So Mark, why don't you figure out how many employees and like how, if you want to give some, that doesn't need to be overnight, but like how, maybe we need to have two different groups, maybe it's one group, just see the response you get. And obviously we can discuss it at a future board meeting of where we want to go. Cause I would not advocate we do any of this before town meeting. I would let town meeting pass and then we can start to look at it.
Well, I think you keep saying town meeting. I think the cutoff date is probably, until the warrant's posted, at the beginning of April and everything in that. I think you've got that month afterwards between the posting and town meeting that possibly could work. So why don't we have some discussion offline as to how that might work?
Okay, sounds good. And then I guess Barry and Dorian, do you think it's a policy or it just comes across in your email that just says we're going to send out a form like once Kristen Pasakane looks at the rollover on July 1st or shortly thereafter, we're just going to send a form out to anyone that carried more than 2 weeks over, just to understand why they carry such a balance, just so that they we can inform us. So I don't know what you think thoughts are there.
Yeah, there's no reason it can't be in the same memo that's going to explain all this, and just say it's a continuing part of our fact finding on trying to understand all this. All we're doing is gathering information. So yeah, I think it makes sense to do it in that format. And I don't think we have to develop any policy to that effect.
I'm comfortable with that. It looks like Paul Sabelli has his hand up.
I just think that the employees are going to be very cooperative to try to help us so we can get this fixed however we need to get it fixed. So I don't think we need a policy on this.
Okay, Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, just Jason, you keep mentioning July 1. Vacation's on anniversary, not July 1. Does that matter on what you're trying to accomplish? Just be careful with that.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, Paul. It probably requires a conversation with Brian and Kristen of, I think it's clear what we're trying to accomplish, but if,
Yes.
I have a list of anniversary dates somewhere from, as I've been looking through this, maybe we pick a few of the major anniversary dates. And obviously I'm also looking to understand, someone like you that's been with the town many years, obviously are going to just have more balance just in general because of your accrual rate. So just, make sure we're capturing enough of a sample to help us, move this forward.
Okay, just wanted to make the point.
That's a great
just
point.
to remind you, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Brian, I see you're on. Maybe you and Kristen can have a discussion of how best to do that, and maybe not limit it to July 1.
Sorry.
Barry, you want me to go to sick?
Yeah, go ahead.
This one is tough because I think we are just woefully outside the times, but I also truly respect that some people may, I think Attorney Fedorov hit it spot on. Some people, especially if they're very close to retirement, may be counting on it. I'm just going to walk through in my mind, and I'll do it very quickly, the potential options I thought about, and I'll give you kind of what my thought was of where we go. There's one part of me that says, just do nothing and just let it continue. There's one part that says, put something into the SAP this year that says effective July 1, 2022 for any employees hired after that date. They are not subject to sick leave payout, period. I of any kind. Option 3 was to say effective July 1, 2022, any sick leave accrued by any employee after that date would not be subject to payout. And option 4 was to institute a cap on the total amount that a payout could be. And you could bifurcate that based on existing employees versus new employees, or some sort, but I'm not recommending we go down that path, and that would be too sudden of a change and not achieve the desired result. But I did want to acknowledge that if you look at just some of the department head contracts in particular, a lot of them, other than certain death benefits, wouldn't get a penny if they retired with the town today, if they were eligible for retirement. So I'm personally just, I eliminated number 4. I'm also going to eliminate 1, in my opinion, which was do nothing. I think we need to discuss option 2 versus option 3, which would just make this prospective change. I certainly have enough data to do that pretty easily, but also you wouldn't be taking anything away in option 3 from any employee. It would basically just freeze the maximum possible payout, but also protect, God forbid they or a family member need to use some of that time subject to FMLA, et cetera, that it would be there for them. So that's where I'm currently at. So I'll pause and turn the floor back to you, Barry.
Okay, I mean, for the reasons that I articulated earlier, I would be in favor of frankly doing nothing at this time, that we have identified the problem, but I see it as part of the broader discussion of what we're going to do on the benefits. And one of the reasons I'm reluctant to do anything, even to cut off people from the future, is because there are towns, comparable towns that do payouts. And so I haven't concluded in my own mind that from a competitive standpoint, we should do away with it. That's not to say that someone takes a job with the town figuring they're going to get this huge amount of money at the end, but it's just, for me, it's part of the entire evaluation of our benefits. It's part of the dialogue, and I don't want to jump to do something now when I haven't had the conversation about what we're doing on everything. So for those reasons, I wouldn't be in favor of making any change at this time. Okay, I've silenced the room, but
No, I'm waiting to have my
okay, Dory.
voice heard. Personally, I believe I would like to see more information, what the actual impact is going to be to our employees now. I believe that if we take option 2, because Jason took 1 off, not doing anything, with no payout at all for any new employees coming forward. I actually don't have a problem with that, except is that going to impact us getting new employees in with competitions from other towns? So that needs to be considered before doing that. But in my personal opinion, payouts for sick time is not a bonus system, and it shouldn't be getting used for that. We have sick time for the purpose of using sick time. I don't want to do something that's going to negatively impact our employees right now. I'm absolutely concerned about anything impacting them. So I guess I'm okay with choice 2, but I don't think I'm ready to really make a decision, maybe next meeting, but I don't want to just say yes and then regret it. I'm not ready. I don't have enough information. I need more information. And I've got to just, someone's at my door. I'm really sorry. And there's no one else here. So I'm just going to jump and grab that real quick. I'm sorry. I've got a delivery coming.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah, so Barry, I'm totally fine taking number 3 off the table. I think it was just, I thought it was interesting. There were people in the responses that actually, I think someone said you actually should take away sick leave payouts. I think someone said that, which it was just, an interesting data point, because I think we all are on the same page. We don't want to negatively impact current employees. So I, my rationale for continuing with number 2, though, is it obviously keeps all current employees free and clear from any impact or any change. And I can't imagine, although I could be convinced otherwise, that this is a bargaining tool that anyone would go out and use, because it's basically, if someone's younger in their career, just starting out, they've got 30 to 40 years that they would have to invest in the town of Southborough to see this benefit. I think by putting this effective for new employees after 7/1/23 just allows us to put a stake in the ground. We can certainly revisit it. However, let's just say, as we do our further analysis, we really find, because I think the majority of towns aren't doing this, or they're capping the payout for all employees, and they did it retroactively, was at least what our comparable communities are doing. I think we would have the ability to reverse this. Let's just say you hire someone July 2nd to work in Department A. And we find, as we go through our further review with vacation, that, that was just, not the right decision. We could certainly just remove that and restore the policy. But if we don't put something in place now, every new hire come July 1st would, certainly be subject to the same parameters if we're not looking to go retroactive, which I'm not encouraging us to do, but it really, I just feel like we need to put a stake in the ground on this without impacting the current employees. And that's why I was kind of, at least in the court of moving something on number 2.
Okay, and I appreciate it. And again, for the reason I stated, the other thing is, and this goes back to what I said before, these are significant decisions we make, and I'm just reluctant to be making them with 3 people. It's not to say we're not going to have to make some of these decisions with 3 people, but that, together with the fact that as I look at the list, I think just over half of the comparable towns pay out something on sick leave. A lot of them, as you say, have capped it at some dollar amount. So the majority of towns we compare ourselves do something. So I just am not comfortable to just say for people going forward, we're not going to do anything. And I say that as someone who doesn't believe we should be paying out anything for sick leave when people leave. I think I've said that on the record before.
Mhm.
I don't understand what the philosophy is, why you're paying people for not using something that thankfully they didn't need. That's not what sick leave was intended to do. But just as we sit here and look at where we sit among comparable towns, I'm just not comfortable in saying the right thing for us to do going forward is to say, no, we're not going to pay out anything.
And the one thing I'll point out on the cap is most of those towns instituted that retroactively, which I don't agree with, full disclosure, but that was what my research showed. So, Barry, I guess part of this is when I was a member of advisory, I brought this issue forward in November of 2020. There was a fairly significant discussion at advisory that obviously led to motions and letters. And candidly, we rolled up our sleeves on the balance sheet of the town, and it just wasn't pretty. So I am not going to push something that we're not comfortable with. I just think it's wrong. And I'm not willing to create any sort of tension, not only amongst the three of us, but amongst the employees that I deeply respect. And I think I have relationships with a lot of them in terms of working through various issues for their departments. But what I would like, if we are going to do nothing, that this board commit, assuming that there will be a fall town meeting, that we be ready to go with, we roll up our sleeves and really deal with this, because every day that passes, we're going to be paying these, I'd rather be paying these employees in the moment for their service, their great service to the town. And I'd like to find ways to think about that. That could include consideration of just, it's a money thing in the near term, but you may just cash people out and say, and recognize they've accrued a benefit and stop it at their current rate. I don't know if that's the answer or not, but I would just like a commitment, at least from the two of you, that we would continue to make this an active priority. And I do recognize we are 2 people short, which is mainly why I'm willing to kind of take my foot off the gas pedal, which is not easy for any of you that know me.
Yeah, but and let me say, it's on us. I mean, you brought this to us quite a while ago, and we essentially didn't do anything with it. We talked about it, we said, but we didn't take action until you joined the board and pushed it forward. So, that's our fault, that we should have acted sooner than we did. And I certainly have a commitment from me that I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to get something ready for a fall town meeting. So I see Dorian shaking her head as well, so I assume she agrees. So that's not an issue. I would just like it to be part of a global package of, these are the changes we'd like to make in vacation and sick leave, and do it as a package rather than do it. But I certainly take your point. It costs the town money and we need to address it. So
Yeah, my goal with all of this is to recognize our employees in the present for the great work they're doing. And maybe that's salary adjustments, maybe that's, stipends, bonuses, but recognizing someone 30 years later is just, I don't think, the right answer. So, I see a lot of employees here. I am happy to sit down with any single one of them individually and talk through it. And I welcome creative ideas on how we can make this place a more attractive place to work and stay.
Okay. I think we're sort of in agreement that this will be a front burner issue going forward with the firm goal of having something ready for a fall town meeting. And when I say something, I mean hopefully a proposal with regard to both vacation and sick leave. So.
Yeah, we just need more time to study it a little bit more and really understand the impact. So I'm in agreement that we should be waiting.
Okay,
Did you have a hand raised? Are you, do you want to speak with Mr. Sibili again?
sure. Yes, Paul.
I just wanted to make a really quick point. First of all, we do get a lot of sick time, but again, it's, as you well know, it's because we don't have short-term disability. And really, when I was hired 20 years ago or 23 years ago, it was explained to me about the 20%. And again, remember, you have to go the whole route and retire to get that 20%, which I don't see people seeing. The younger crowd, they seem to switch jobs quite a bit. I don't think it's going to quite have the impact that you would think as of today with a lot of the longer employees or older employees, but it's certainly a financial issue we have to think about. The other thing is, the 20% was really, I know, Dorian, you made a comment on that. It's not, I don't know if you'd want to call it a bonus. The reason for that is, unfortunately, you do have municipal employees who in the past and in other communities, it's kind of a known fact that they abuse it. And one of the things is a way to incentivize not to use it or to have good attendance. And I just wanted to make that point. And I don't know if you call it a bonus or whatever. That's the reason why it came about. And that's how it was explained when I came here. And it is a benefit. It's definitely a benefit. And I personally don't have any problem with option 2. And I don't think many employees that I talk to do have. I think it addresses exactly what Jason is saying. And I like option 2 for the fact that it's consistent with exactly what our town attorney is saying, grandfather it in. As far as option 3, the reason that, you brought people on with this benefit, you hired them, honor it. And I know you 3 probably weren't on the board when all this came about. You definitely weren't, but you still, honor it. I think you owe it to the employees. But one of the things I would like to know, if anybody out there does in fact have a problem with what Jason's saying for option 2 and eliminating it moving forward. I know I don't. And I think if you're hiring people and you say it, this is it, it's not a benefit for you, nobody can argue about that. I really don't. And I think it kind of, starts to address the issue without a doubt. Thank you.
Okay, I think we decided to move on, but just to respond to that, of course, people who are on board have no problem with saying people who are hired later don't get something. I mean, it doesn't impact them in any way. So I'm not surprised that employees, I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm not surprised that employees are perfectly willing to say someone hired later doesn't get something that I have. That's just normal human behavior. So that doesn't convince me that that's something that should be done. But anyway, I think we have a consensus about how we're going to move forward, and we're already past 2 hours and we still have things to do. So unless anyone has another comment on that subject, I'd like to move on. Seeing none, just briefly back to reports.
Had to be said.
Vanessa, you have a couple of departures.
Sure. As noted in the memo I sent to you that's in your packet, we have had 2 resignations from part-time dispatchers. We are about to post that notice today again. So we are very much hoping to get some help on board down at the police department, or public safety complex, I should say. We are, just to give you a quick update on IT, as noted earlier, we have had some difficulty. It's been challenging to hire someone into this position that has been funded, of course. We've had several finalists. Things have not worked out based on, background checks or other conditions. So we're moving forward, and Jay and I are hoping to do additional interviews this week.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're back to the SAP changes, and we've just got a few that we have to vote on. We never voted to add Juneteenth as a holiday. I believe that's something we discussed. I believe it's being done in the collective bargaining agreement. So I think it should be non-controversial, but I will make a motion to amend section 9A of the SAP to add Juneteenth as a holiday. Is there a second?
Second for discussion.
Okay, I'll open it for discussion.
I just, a question for Mr. Purple. I know you're obviously you're actively bargaining collective bargaining agreements, so you can defer, but if we approve this and town meeting approves it, and I'm in favor of approving it, just for the record, is there language across the board that would make this available for all? Because I mean, as much as I want the SAP employees to have it, I think it's more important to recognize the holiday that it is. There's obviously no school that day. So is there a mechanism that you will have either through bargaining or department head contracts that this would be universal throughout the town and be a recognized holiday if we put it into the SAP?
So it all, what in terms of the collective bargaining, I will say it is in all of my discussions at this point. I would have to go back and look at the individual department head contracts. I know that a lot of them simply tie to the SAP for those things. So if the SAP changes, theirs will change automatically. I can see if there are any anomalies, but I believe it would, assuming it ends up in the final MOAs for negotiations and personnel board makes this change, I think it would be across the board.
So Barry, if this all goes through and Mark finds an anomaly with the with any department head contracts, which I realize may include his own because I haven't read his, that we should just notify the select board. I mean, obviously they're going to know about the change in the SAP, but make it abundantly clear that we'd recommend that they offer an addendum or just tell the employee to take it. I know it's a little odd to be adding a holiday in the middle of the year. And I think we also need to think about how it would work if we approve this. It's obviously going to be before this town meeting, but our SAP isn't effective until July 1 of 2022. So I think that's maybe a select board discussion of how you would implement that, because I do know many municipalities did this last year. So I think we're actually a year behind, to be completely honest, and did offer the holiday to those employees, collective bargaining, department heads, and SAP employees. So I would just think that's obviously a broader discussion than the board, but there is a timing issue here too, even if we're all unanimous and town meeting's unanimous.
Yeah, well, at the end, we can only control what we can control. We can't, but I take your point. That's fair. Dorianne, anything?
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, I think I need a,
Want me
okay,
to
we
move
have
the
a second.
I seconded you, so I think you're ready
Yes,
for
he
vote.
did second it. So roll call vote, Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So that's done. Then we have 13A. This is the discussion we had with the town clerk and who built on proposed language from the town administrator and finance director. So if you look at the language, the new language, it would now read, part-time employee may work 20 hours or more per week for no longer than 2 biweekly pay periods or 4 biweekly pay periods in the case of an election worker during an election cycle, if requested by a department head due to exigent circumstances, or for longer if recommended by the appointing authority or the personnel director with the authorization of the finance director and approval of the personnel board. In such cases, the employee will remain a part-time employee with no change in status. And then B similarly reads, department heads may submit requests for additional compensation for part-time employees temporarily working full-time hours, subject to available funding as authorized by the finance director and approved by the personnel board. Any discussion? Okay, I will make a motion to amend section 13 as just read. Is there a second? Okay, all in favor, Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. I just want to check, but I think we obviously still have the Board of Health issue outstanding. And we may have to have a meeting next week to deal with that. But I think we've handled any other amendments anyone wants to bring up to the SAP?
Agreed.
Okay, let's talk about format for the annual meeting. In the past, and maybe Vanessa, you can tell us what we've done in the past.
Sure. There's been a couple of different versions of how the personnel board has handled this, but most recently, we have had some handouts of, in the warrant, of course, goes the clean copy of the new SAP as being proposed. There have been handouts that show the track changes version. So anyone attending town meeting can see exactly what we just reviewed, what's been crossed out, what's been added, et cetera. The other thing that the former chair that has done in the past was have sort of a summary document just with a very short description of each item and why it was changed. So, you know, that's something we can certainly work on, but I wanted to see what the board was looking for this particular town meeting.
What are people's thoughts on that? Do we still want to do all three? Are we good with just the track changes? Are we good with just an explanation? But I don't have strong feelings about this.
I think we should do all three. We should have a clean copy so they see exactly how it's gonna read. They should see what our changes were. So, and with an explanation so they understand why. Otherwise, you know, it's gonna get stopped on town floor. We're gonna have a major discussion on every single thing. So I say, put it all out there, get people to understand why we did what we did, and then it should be a lot easier at town meeting for us.
I agree. I'm always hesitant with volumes of paper being printed, but I think we need to be cognizant that certain people just do not like digital still and will never like it for many reasons. So I just would ask that we, balance the printing versus, I think the town clerk implemented a pretty successful QR code sort of format. And I would say, given that it's now March 9th and we're done as a personnel board with our changes, so unless the select board or advisory have a conflicting opinion that causes us to revisit anything, which I'm hoping is not the case, you can start posting this on the town website now and getting it out there. That just allows more people to look at. Now, I know people aren't going to look at it till the day of or the day before, but at least we can say we did our job and didn't rush anything, and it was well thought out, almost 2 months in advance of town meeting.
Okay, so you're in favor of continuing to do what we have done?
If it's not too much of a burden on you or the Vanessa or any of the townhouse staff.
No, we will do that then. Okay, we've got just an administrative matter. So when Betsy was chair, she had the authorization from the board to sign invoices and payrolls to allow money to be paid out. So Vanessa has come to me requesting that I be given similar authority to do that on behalf of the board. Happy to having discussions, or we could have someone else or someone in addition to, whatever is your pleasure.
So here's my thoughts. I obviously trust you and Dorianne, regardless of what roles any of us have on the board. My recommendation is that should be a last resort. So if a bill needs to be paid because it's going to be overdue, we're going to start collecting interest, fine, the chair should sign it, especially if we had a vote in a public meeting to authorize a contract, like, the thing about the Collins Center item we talked about earlier, for example, or tuition reimbursement. But if possible, and it lines up with our meetings, I do think it's always helpful, and this is really to protect you, Barry, in case there's a question later on, that the full board just vote on approval of an invoice or a payment. So, I obviously wouldn't call a special meeting for one invoice unless it's critical, but like, I'm just speaking from experience in the public safety building. We processed $19.6 million of invoices, and the committee voted on them, and it had the backstop of, in that instance, 9 people and not one person. I just trying to protect you. I have no problem authorizing you to do it, but I would just encourage you, make us vote too, unless it's an emergency.
And I think that's how we have,
Yeah.
Vanessa can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how we have operated. And maybe there are incidental office expenses or something like that, but in terms of any expenditure for employee development or any of those things, they're all voted on by the board certainly prior to Betsy signing off on money being paid out.
Okay,
Is that
that was unclear. Sorry, then, I think we're all on the same page. That was unclear to me because it was just the form from Carla in our packet, that I was looking at. So I didn't know if like Vanessa forwards an invoice tomorrow for tuition reimbursement, whether you would bring that to the board or whether, whether you would just sign it sort of thing.
I mean, that's correct. Is that correct, Vanessa?
Yes, the Betsy would come in after the fact, after the meeting where the board voted to endorse an expense and sign the payable. The physical invoice was not very often in your packet. It was more a vote on the topic or the item.
Okay, I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
we voted on every expense and then as the clerk, I was the backup to the chair to sign anything, which I never had to do, but.
Yeah. I just think that process is I think a great best practice because I think it creates transparency, even though we don't have obviously the largest budget in town.
No, but we were already doing it. We're good.
Yeah,
I love it.
and I would assure the board that I would not sign anything that had not been authorized by the board. So, with the possible exception of buying a postage stamp, perhaps, something of that sort. But I
So
would
Barry, do you need a
put
motion?
I guess we do need a
Yes, please.
motion authorizing me to sign invoices and payrolls. Not really payrolls. It says payrolls, but it's really just invoices, right?
Right.
Vanessa?
Yes.
I second.
All right. All in favor, Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye if I'm allowed to vote. All right. Moving on to the building department. Why don't you bring Ms. Lavoli in?
I'll just message her in case she stepped away from her computer.
Okay. Oh. Are you there, Laurie? I think you're on mute. I think we can't hear you. Yeah, I don't know what's happening. We can't hear you.
It might be helpful for you to exit the meeting, Lori, and come right back in. Sometimes that will reset everything.
I'm going to step away for 1 second while she's
Okay.
doing that.
Okay, we'll bring her back. No.
No, can't hear you.
Let me call Jay and see if he can assist.
Okay. Mark,
Vanessa, I wonder if you can just give her the dial-in.
Mark,
Yeah,
you and
I
I
can
will
do that too.
talk offline about your conversation with Kate and how we can proceed on the Board of Health matter.
Yes.
But without going into it, will we need to meet next week to do that?
That I don't know. We should talk about that. Like I said, I had a broad brush from Kate, but there was a couple of questions.
Okay,
I can actually forward you, I think, that information, and you could take a look at it, and then we can chat.
okay.
Okay.
But we should probably tentatively pick a date for next week when we could meet if we have to.
Okay.
And Barry, that's only the Board of Health topic, nothing else?
That would be my plan, just the Board of Health matter. So yeah, we don't even,
That's good, because it's a bad week for me.
yeah. So Dorianne, next week.
I'm with Mickey Mouse. I'm in
You have
Disney
to-
all week. I leave Friday. I'm in Disney. Everyone else is here but me. I'm going to Disney alone for my birthday.
Okay,
But I'll have my phone, so I'll have the Zoom app so I could call in.
so
I could call
is there
in.
one day that's better for you than another?
No, doesn't matter. I'll just, whatever you have to do, I'll just step aside from wherever I am.
Okay,
As long as
Okay.
it's not a long meeting like this, if it's a
Yeah, okay.
short, that's
No,
fine.
just-
If it's a long meeting, I can't.
no,
do
it's just going to be the one issue on the Board of Health, that's all.
That's fine. Yeah, I should be able to do it.
Okay, I'll communicate with you about a date then.
Okay.
I just gave her the phone number to call in, so she's gonna try that.
Okay,
She just was making sounds when Dorian was talking. She was
Oh.
lighting up in yellow.
It wasn't me?
No, it was Lori.
To Zoom, enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
We can hear, Lori, you're lit
yeah,
up.
Lori.
I
can
need
you-
the meeting ID number.
No,
Oh,
you're
no,
good.
we can hear you now.
Hear you.
Hang up.
But I can barely hear you now. It's coming from my laptop.
Okay, well, good morning.
I'm gonna have to strain to hear you. Good morning.
Okay. Well, can you just give us some background on what you're attempting to do here?
I'm attempting to add a part-time local inspector to the building department to help with the department responsibilities as far as permitting, plan review, enforcement with zoning, and the overall day-to-day operations, as well as have somebody who would take the commissioner's place in my absence, whether it be for a vacation. At this point, we use an alternate inspector who just does inspections but is not here in the office. We'll do some plan review, but is not up to date on the zoning and the day-to-day operations of the department. They're here intermittently, a couple of times a year. And this person would also go to meetings. We have different meetings that I do, and as well
go out and do inspections. In the last year, we've had, I think I went over this, I'm not sure if you had looked at everything with relative to the numbers or if I'm repeating myself, but between July and 20 and June of 2021, and this is just building related inspections, I conducted 875 inspections myself. So that's time that I'm not in the office, and that is just time spent out in the field. So in addition to that, that person would also help in responding to all of our emergency situations that we have. If there's a fire, somebody drives into a building that's at night, and also help with all of our required annual inspections for the schools and the daycares and the restaurants. Anything that's unsafe that I may get a call on, handicapped accessibility, etc. So it's an additional person would just help enhance the public safety as well as enhance any enforcement for the town of Southborough. So I'm looking for somebody, as we have been very busy in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, but the responsibilities and enforcement and other items that have been, placed on inspectors has, has also become more demanding as far as energy and structural and mechanical and fire safety, and as well as codes changing all the time, and zoning bylaws written in that have changed.
Has funding for this position been signed off on by advisory?
I'm not sure if it has been by advisory. I have not met with advisory, but I believe it has been by the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
Okay.
And it would be in the under the revolving for a year, if I understand correctly. I'm not sure if that's changed or not.
No, that's correct. So we have an inspectional revolving fund. We do have enough funds in there to be able to pay for the position for fiscal '23. I think it gives us a sense of getting some history with the position. But if everything goes accordingly, I think it would end up coming into the budget in some respect in fiscal '24.
Right, and so we did have an increase in fees from over the past year, and the increase in fees in general brought in 112% more than the previous year, and over 366,000 more. This part-time position would be a 19.5 unbenefited position that's, rounded off to about $32,000 a year. So the department brings in, and this includes plumbing and electrical fees also, but building permits itself were last year 657,000, and the year before were 290,000. So that increase in the fees, as well as the increase in the number of permits, has brought that number up significantly.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions.
I have no questions on the need for the position. Obviously, funding source is not our priority. I know we've had some animated discussions around making sure there is budget for it. So I think just I'll add color commentary. I think that's a prudent way to go to, that's a high volume of inspections, Lori, and kudos to you. I know it's not what you're here to talk about, but that's impressive. What I would say, Barry, is given that this is a part-time position, what are our thoughts on, it's really a question for you. What are your thoughts on next steps here to get this ready for town meeting?
Well, and I may have misspoken earlier, because we now have to grade it in order to determine the job grade. So that's going to have to be approved at our meeting next week or whenever. So there is one more step here, and from a timing perspective, we're going to have to figure how we're going to do that. So yeah, today we have to approve the job description, and then at another meeting, we have to set the job grade. So, yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, so I have no questions on the job description.
Okay, Dorian?
I have no questions on the job description, but so we have no sense of what advisory is thinking of this position going forward financially. I understand the first year will be paid from the revolving fund, but is that going to be an ongoing thing, or is this definitely going to be added to the budget? And what does that make the building budget look like going forward? Because that's going to be an increase in salary and it's a non-benefited position, and it's going to stay a non-benefited position, right? Okay. So there's only the expense of the salary. And they're not getting a vehicle, or we're not gonna have to buy a car or anything like that, correct?
No, just mileage reimbursement at some level.
Okay. I mean, we have no idea what advisory is saying. I mean, are they gonna want this to stay with the revolving fund to pay for it, or is this gonna become a
I think
burden?
the idea was, for next fiscal year for FY23, we get some data on, how many inspections, what other tasks is this person asked to take on, for the first year. And then, we mid-year when we start budgets again, actually earlier than mid-year, we would start looking at, is this something that we want to shift over to the operating budget or maintain in the revolving fund?
Okay. That's good. That's all I have.
All right.
And maybe very, sorry, can I just, I know I said I was done, just to bolt on what Dorian said. I think we're lucky we have this revolving fund, and it's nice to be able to try these positions out and justify them without committing to permanency. It's obviously part-time, but Lori, I'll just encourage you, obviously you had some good data on the revenue that you're bringing in, and obviously that's highly dependent on the construction industry, but to formally justify this permanently, I would just encourage you to continuing to think about the fees you charge and making sure, just because I've been through building permit processes, of what diligence you're doing on the back end when you're doing final inspections on the scope of work done. Like, i.e., did I say I'm doing $2,000 worth of work, but I added, I added 1,000 square feet to my house. Like, it clearly wasn't 2,000 of work. Making sure you're getting the right fees for your department. If there's any processes or protocols you can continue to enhance there, I'd encourage you to work with other town boards and advisory on that in particular.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for the board to approve the job description for the local building inspector.
So moved.
Is there a second? She raised, let the record show Dorian raised her hand, but she's on mute. I'll take that as a second. We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Malinowski.
Second, there's your official second, sorry.
Aye for me.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So that's all we need to do at this meeting with regard to that. And we will, at a subsequent meeting, perhaps next week, approve what classification the position would go in Schedule C. I think that complete. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you. Let me know if you have any more questions.
Okay,
Okay,
I think that completes our business.
thank God.
Barry, just one thing for future full board meetings, like not like the interim meetings, but one of the things that was in the survey is, a few employees commented on public comment. I would encourage us to add public comment to the beginning, which can be obviously for the public or the employees, just to, if they have anything that's on their mind. So I just, as you and Vanessa think through future agendas, I just wanted to make sure that wasn't lost in all the Section 11 discussion.
Yeah. Okay, good point. And in fact, and I don't know why I'm not seeing it, but if anyone is listening and has a question or comment, please raise your hand and we'd be happy to hear from you.
Nope, I do not see any. I just wanted to note that Mr. Purple just ran into some technical difficulties with his computer. That's the only reason why he left the meeting.
Okay, duly noted. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry, Barry,
Oh.
one more question. Do you want to schedule the next meeting, the next interim meeting now, or do you want to do that over,
Well-
schedules over email?
I was going to do it in email because it sounded like, Jason, you're going to be away. Right,
Thursday and Friday will not work for me.
okay,
And not to speak for my wife, but she'll be with me. So,
won't
if
work
you're
for
dealing
her.
with the Board of
either.
Health topic, that will be a similar issue. So Monday through Wednesday.
Okay, Wednesday looks best for me. Dorian, I know you have a busy schedule next week. Is there a
Wednesday the
time of day
16th?
that work? I'm sorry.
Wednesday, the 16th?
Yeah,
You tell me, I'm open. I'm just gonna be
Okay.
with Vicky, going on rides.
okay. So can we say tentatively 9 AM on the 16th?
Perfect.
I will have a hard stop at 10, but sounds like we can get
Yeah,
this.
I mean, it should,
Oh,
Can
we
please
do-
don't be for an hour. No,
Yeah.
don't give me an hour meeting.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
All right.
I got it.
okay. Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Zeski,
Aye.
the chair votes aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all for all of your time today. I apologize it took so long, but a lot of ground to cover.
No worries.
And I will-
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Probably see you next week.